Welcome to Bunny Trails, a whimsical adventure of idioms and other turns of phrase. I'm Shauna Harrison.
And I'm Dan Pugh. Each week, we take an idiom or other turn of phrase and try to tell the story from its entry into the English language to how it's used today. Have you ever been in an unfamiliar situation and you're unsure of how to act or what to do?
All the time.
All the time, right? Maybe it's being at a friend's house, or you can tell the rules are different at their house, than they are at yours. Or maybe you're a guest at like a religious or a cultural event, or possibly you're just visiting a different part of the world. So in those situations, at least what I do, I just watch what everyone else is doing and I try to, kind of do what they do to fit in. Because when in Rome, you do as the Romans do.
I'm so excited to hear about this one.
This actually, it's a pretty fun entry story. So, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, when in Rome, do as the Romans do means, quote, when abroad or in an unfamiliar environment, adopt the customs or behavior of those around you, end quote.
Okay.
So this one has a quite common origin story that comes to us from letters written in Latin. I don't read Latin, so I cannot verify this origin outside of English. But there are reputable sources and experts that are in those fields that use this as the origin story. And so I'm going to start with it as reported at dictionary.com. And this starts off with a usage example. Quote, follow local custom, as in Kate said they'd all be wearing shorts or blue jeans to the outdoor wedding. So when in Rome, we'll do the same. This advice allegedly was St. Ambrose's answer to St. Augustine when asked whether they should fast on Saturday as the Romans did or not, as in Milan, end quote. On a side note, I did, when I was looking at this, according to the National Honey Board, St. Ambrose is the patron saint of beekeepers.
Yes.
Okay, actually, one of 5 patron saints of beekeepers. And that led me down a rabbit hole that we're not going to talk about here, but we are going to look at some of those patron saints in the behind the scenes, as quoted from the National Honey Board. So you can check that out. It's available every Friday on Patreon, which is patreon.com/bunnytrailspod. But this phrase appears to have started in Latin in about 387 Common Era. So Ambrose was the bishop of Milan from 347 to 393. And Augustine of Hippo moved to Milan from Rome. He moved to Milan from Rome around 384. So Ambrose, 347 to 397, I may have said something else. And then Augustine had moved to Milan from Rome around 384. And Augustine had sought advice from Ambrose around 387, which is when the letters would show that this may have started. And the advice given was effectively saying, to avoid scandal, follow the customs of the church you are attending. So they fasted on Saturday in Rome, and they did not fast on Saturdays in Milan. So when you're in Rome, you should do as the Romans do and fast on Saturday. But when you're on Milan, you could do as they do in Milan and not fast on Saturday. So that's kind of where this started with this thing, or at least the thought is it built off of this from letters that they had written at that time frame and captured in this stuff. And most of the early things that I see written down are from the Catholic Church. So that kind of lends a little bit of credence to this as an origin story. Though, in fairness, a lot of things were only written by the Catholic Church, so because they were writing things down, whereas others were not.
Right. I could definitely see this being an origin that makes sense, because like once you have a good example of something, then you're gonna keep using it, and at that time that would have been a perfect, like everybody would have understood that as an example of the concept too.
Right.
So.
Well, it certainly in later years seemed to not necessarily be advice that the Catholic Church wanted to continue to give, because I think when you have
then it's like, wait a minute,
right? When you have one person who is supposedly speaking, as the Catholic Church does, they have a pope, right, and they're speaking with the Word of God. Then there's not a lot of wiggle room there,
right?
It's they don't have a lot of tolerance for gray areas. If it's if this is the rule here, it should be the rule for all Catholics everywhere. And there was definitely a time in Catholicism where that was the prominent viewpoint, is that everyone should follow our specific interpretation of it. And so it's definitely changed quite a bit over the years. But so that, of course, all of those things that I just talked about happened before English was a thing. So the first time we see it in English, as makes sense, is through translated works from things written in Latin. And we're going to start with an early example of the translated phrase in English. This is from Richard Taverner's 1545 translation of Erasmus's Proverbs or Adages, and it is brought to us by way of the Oxford English Dictionary. Quote, "With this Latin proverb agreeth, yet which is commonly in every man's mouth in England, when you art at Rome, do as they do at Rome." End quote.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so nice and simple and easy. This is a Latin proverb, according to Erasmus and the translation. This is a Latin proverb that when you are in Rome, you do as they do in Rome.
Alrighty. Yeah, I like that. Erasmus is a pretty recognized work there at the time.
And here's another example. This one from 1670. This is another one that is a translation, although the translation or the work itself was also around the same time frame. So it was written in Latin and then was translated to English. This example comes from George Haver's 1670 translation of Gregorio Ledi's 1669 work, The History of the Cardinals of the Roman Church. Quote, "If you ask a Catholic why he commits such faults as these, he presently answers you, whilst one is at Rome, one must live as they do there, out of Rome as in other places. Nor are the Protestants unprovided of the same answer when they reside in Catholic countries, and this is the miserable case of religion." End quote.
Okay. Wow.
So he does go on to say he doesn't think this is the norm, and he knows many people who don't do this, but it does serve as a warning to those who would break the tenets of the faith in the name of convenience. And this is what Ledi was trying to speak against.
The difficulty with that too is that Latin is a combined terms language. In the simplest way to describe it, the one word in Latin doesn't always just mean one word in English.
Sure.
Like the translation is going to be different, and sometimes it's conceptual, and the order and the combination of the different Latin terms will affect the meaning of the phrase. And so it's always a somewhat of a guess anyway, or not, I mean, based on what that meant at the time also.
Sure.
So translations are tricky from Latin.
Yes. Well, English is very much like that in some portions, but of course, since English is basically three other languages masquerading in a trench coat, it would make sense that we did borrow some of those same things. All right, so here's an example from a letter that was written by Pope Clement XIV to Dom Galliard, prior of the Chartreux at Rome, and it is dated September 21st, 1754. Quote, "The siesto, or afternoon's nap of Italy, my most dear and reverend father, would not have alarmed you so much if you have recollected that when we are at Rome, we should do as the Romans do. Cum Romano, Romanus eris." End quote. Yet another piece. This is actually the Pope at the time saying this. Okay. So definitely, I think an interesting
Lend
point.
Some credence or some
Right. It's still, if it does. Yeah, exactly. It lends a little more credence to there is every reason that we could believe that the origin story could be true.
Right.
Certainly, the Catholic Church seems to have adopted it to some extent. Well, we start to see it moving out into a broader world, out of the Christian world at points in the 1700s and beyond. But some of the times that I start seeing it really make its way into secular statements otherwise are in the 1800s. And here's an example that cites the phrase as an old proverb, which at this point it is. This is from the American Watchman and Delaware Advertiser out of Wilmington, Delaware, USA. Dated February 17th, 1826. The paragraph is called Conformity to the World. Quote, There is an old and wise proverb teaching the propriety of complying with the requisites of the various fashions of the inhabitants of earth, which is expressed in the words and to the effect as follows: When you are in Rome, do as the Romans do. End quote.
And in this case, it says fashions. That would have been more not like
Not clothing,
not
right?
clothing fashions, but
yes,
the
trends and what
trends.
people are
Yeah,
doing.
the
Right, which is where
tendencies would be a good
clothing
replacement word.
fashions word comes from.
Yes.
So, well, this next one is from the Daybook out of Chicago, Illinois, and it is dated March 17th, 1913. It references two people dressing up to attend to foreign representatives in Washington, D.C. Quote, "It was all right to sling on the togs, too. When in Rome, do as the Romans do, or you may find yourself in the main sewer instead of the leading restaurant."
Ooh.
End quote. All right. I really like this
there's
one.
that too. You have your choice, and other people have theirs too.
That's true. I like this one because it also mentions sling on the togs as as kind of a slang, and the sling on the togs is in a little air quotes basically. So I think that's very interesting.
Nice.
And in this case, they're dressed up in very fancy frocks, these very formal frocks basically. So I had not heard that phrase before, and I guess I could look it up and try and figure out where it comes from. But
I think it's about togas.
I thought it might be, but they're definitely not wearing togas. So if it was, it'd be metaphorical.
Well, I would assume it is anyway, just because it is in the singular quotation marks that they're, quoting a common phrase,
I don't know if it's a common phrase or if there's commenting on togas. They could very well just have made it up for the moment and expected everyone to get it,
because
since he's
they were
even
also
the Roman.
referencing Rome.
Since he was, yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Here's an alternate take on the phrase, seen in the Evening Star out of Washington, D.C., USA, and it was dated June 6th, 1948. This is talking about the making of Gregory Ratoff's newest film, Footlight Serenade, and it was filmed on location in Rome. First, we'll see the alternate take, and then I'll skip down several paragraphs to show how the author of this newspaper article totally missed the point. Quote, "Making a screen epic in the Eternal City was easy for Gregory Ratoff. His rule, when in Rome, be yourself." End quote.
Okay.
So if you are comfortable with who you are, I think that that's great advice. Be yourself. Many people are still trying to figure out themselves, and they're trying to figure out, who they are. And for those folks, that advice won't do much good. And that's not just young people. It can be anyone who's had a big change in their life. If you take somebody who's been married for the last 20 years and, now they're divorced, they may be trying to figure out who they are again.
Right.
Or you take someone who's had kids and the kids are all out of the house, and now they're trying to redefine themselves, not as a parent, but as a person, who actually gets to take care of themselves first and foremost for a change,
Right.
So, or someone who's been doing the same job for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just about being young and maybe not figuring yourself out in your teenage years, but, there lots of people can be in a situation where be yourself isn't the greatest of advice.
Right.
But in this case, that was the point that Ratoff was making. When he was in Rome, he just tried to be who he was, and that for whatever reason worked out well for him in the filming.
Yeah.
But I don't think that the author got the point, because just a little bit later he says, quote, "Mr. Ratoff had discovered the secret of getting along with the natives. When in Rome, do as Ratoff does."
Oh.
End quote. And I'm like,
Okay.
that's not being yourself. That's being someone else.
Right. See, this is one of those interesting things where it's such a I don't know, like English, we got to like narrow down all the meanings of everything instead of just kind of accepting
Right.
a concept for the broad strokes that it's trying to apply.
Sure.
Yeah. So like in this case, okay, if the rule is to take your shoes off at the door, take your shoes off at the door. Don't be rude. And then like that doesn't mean that you have to act exactly like them or mimic them while you're inside their house. Like,
Right.
It's like those are totally different things.
There is also an alternate explanation where the author thinks that when Ratoff said, "When in Rome, be yourself," he really meant, "When in Rome, do what I do and don't do what other people do," which is also another interpretation of this. It's not the one I
see.
took from having read the entire thing, but
Okay.
I guess it is a possible interpretation. So to recap, The phrase likely started in Latin with advice from the Catholic Church in the late 300s Common Era and moved into English in the mid 1500s. It spread outside the church by the 1800s, though it probably did that sooner, and we still use it today in much the same way, though with broader implications. And with that, it is time to move to our more modern uses, but first, we need to say thank you to our sponsors.
This episode is sponsored by our amazing patrons on Patreon. And the cool thing about Patreon is it is 100% free to join the community. We have new things every weekday on the feeds. On Mondays, we have a conversation about what movies, shows, books, podcasts, and whatever else everyone is enjoying. Tuesdays see early access to the week's podcast. Wednesdays have all the links, books, songs, and other content mentioned in the week's episode. Thursday has patrons-only polls, and Fridays are our lightly edited behind-the-scenes video featuring all the cut content, goofs, and bonus facts you could imagine.
We've got some other pretty cool stuff too, like original digital artwork once a month made by Shauna, and direct access to talk with us. No algorithms getting in the way of what we see or don't see. Plus, you can get awesome name recognition like Pat Rowe does every episode. And our top spot is currently occupied by the amazing Mary Halsig Lopez. You can join the Bunny Trails community for free at Bunny Trails Pod on Patreon.
That's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod.
Okay, one more quick note, and this one is a word of thanks. JGP sent us some really cool crocheted bunnies to our post office box, and we are now proudly featuring them on our video stream. So huge shout out and thank you to JGP for the really neat bunnies. Thank you.
Thank you, JGP. We love them.
They are awesome. Okay, we're going to jump back in right where we left off. We left off at 1948, and I want to pick back up in that same time frame, 1952. And this is a movie called When in Rome that aired in 1952. And here is some information about that movie from Turner Classic Movies. Quote, on a voyage to Italy for the 1950 Holy Year celebrations, Pennsylvania priest John X. Halligan bunks with Joe Brewster, an affable con man who, unbeknown to John, has escaped from San Quentin. End quote. San Quentin is a famous prison.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pick up with my much shortened synopsis to finish this out. After being initially arrested, thinking he was the con man, Father John is quickly asked to help find the fake Father Joe in Rome and bring him to justice. But along the way, it seems Father Joe, in acting as a priest, may be having a change of heart and is beginning to believe himself worthy of grace.
Okay.
So that's the kind of the concept there. It was directed by Clarence Brown, whose list of films is like reading a list of the biggest movies of the 30s and 40s.
Nice.
Brown also directed the original Angels in the Outfield, which came out in 1951. So, yeah, it was a pretty big name director at the time. And When in Rome stars two big names of the day, Van Johnson as Father John and Paul Douglas as the con man, Joe Brewster.
Okay.
Paul Douglas was also in Angels in the Outfield, the first one, as the manager. So, interesting.
Well, that's cool. Yeah.
In 1988, the band When in Rome had their only top 40 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 with The Promise. The band eventually disbanded after being dropped by Virgin Records in 1993, but we will link to The Promise so you can listen to it. I did not recognize the song when I first saw it, but as soon as I played it, I was like, oh, yeah, okay, no, I know the song.
I was just thinking that. I'm like, I have no idea what this song is, but I bet when I listen to it, I'll be like,
you'll be like, oh, yeah, I've heard this song. Especially knowing your taste in music, yeah, you will have heard this song at least. It also featured in Napoleon Dynamite. When in Rome is a 2010 romance comedy, often referred to as rom-com, starring Kirsten Bell and Josh Duhamel. I assume that's how you say his name, Duhamel? I know his face. I've seen him, but I don't know that I've ever heard his name said.
I don't think I have either.
Here's the synopsis from Disney, who owns the movie. Quote, an ambitious young New Yorker, disillusioned with romance, takes a whirlwind trip to Rome, where she defiantly plucks magic coins from a fountain of love, inexplicably igniting the passion of an odd group of suitors. End quote. The rough thing here is that so she's in Rome for maybe her sister's wedding or somebody. She's the maid of honor, and Everything goes horribly. It's a comedy of errors, you know. And in her frustrated thing, so she takes coins from this fountain. But the mythos around the fountain is if you take a coin, then whoever put it in there will fall in love with you.
Yeah.
And that it follows this whole thing where she has plucked the coin of a guy she met at the wedding and is kind of falling for, but also all of these other people. And
I
so
see.
yeah, it just becomes this real, like I said, comedy of errors
Yeah.
along the whole way, where she's trying to run from them, but also try and figure out if this guy that she's actually falling for is actually into her, or is it just because she plucked his
Right.
coin?
Or is it the
Right. So
coin?
yeah.
Okay.
All right, moving on. Let's talk two different books that share a title. The first is When in Rome, which is a contemporary romance novel by Sarah Adams. And here's a synopsis from Dell Books. Quote, opposites certainly attract for this stranded pop star and small town baker in this charming slice of romance from the author of the TikTok sensation, The Cheat Sheet. Amelia Rose, known as Ray Rose to her adoring fans, is burned out from years of maintaining her Princess of Pop image. Inspired by her favorite Audrey Hepburn film, Roman Holiday, she drives off in the middle of the night for a break in Rome, Kentucky, that is. When Noah Walker finds Amelia on his front lawn in her broken down car, he makes it clear he doesn't have time or patience for celebrity problems. End quote.
Okay.
Of course, Noah ends up seeing the non-celebrity side to Miss Rose, and they fall in love, probably. I haven't read it. I'm just assuming.
That's awesome. It does sound like it's like a modern, like very modern rom-com type of tale,
Yeah, yeah.
So it's interesting.
Here's another book, like I said, same title, When in Rome, though this one is by Liam Callanan and came out in 2023. Here's the synopsis from the author's website. Quote, meet Claire, 52, desperate to do something new and get a fresh start. And Rome, home to a struggling convent facing a precipitous end. The city beckons Claire, who's long had a complicated relationship with religion, including a teenage brush with convent life. Once in Rome, she finds a group of funny, fearless nuns in a gorgeous villa, beautiful runs throughout a color-saturated city, and a chance to reflect. It all leads her to an unexpected question. Should she join the convent? And an answer that startles her as much as it does those closest to her. And Marcus, a once buzzy actor eternally in love with Claire, he's come and gone from Claire's life since college, but now reappears in Rome just as she's about to decide what's next. And Claire searches for her higher calling. She finds the key to her future must lay in her past and involves an actual key. The nuns swear it unlocks nothing, but on a night when choices and voices swirl, Claire finds a long hidden lock. A look at faith in oneself as much as higher power and love, romantic and familial, lost and found. This is the story of a woman who sets out to rewrite her story, only to be surprised by the plot twists life plants. End quote.
Wow, that was like, man, that was a whole.
There's
journey.
a lot going on there. Yeah,
there
was a whole
journey in the synopsis there.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, what an interesting thing. But
also, I don't know if this is a weird thing, but I love stories with nuns in them, like comedies with nuns or any kind
I don't normally, except for Sister Act and Sister Act 2 Back in the Habit. And if they make a Sister Act 3, I'm absolutely going to watch it. So, yeah. Whoopi Goldberg as a fake nun was phenomenal. And that all of those movies were just great. Were just absolutely great. Yeah.
Great music, too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I would totally watch Sister Act 3 if it comes out.
I did really enjoy The Sound of Music, too.
Oh, you know what? I forgot that had nuns or whatever in it. Yeah.
Why? It's like, good times.
Well, this next one is an artwork called When in Rome, and it's by Jen Lublin. It is the fifth in a series of 9 from the Dolce Vita Dreams collection, which debuted in June of 2023. Here is a little from Jen Lublin Designs website. Quote, this whimsical illustration was created to portray La Dolce Vita, transporting you to Rome's Trevi Fountain. Sweet highlights are the famous triple coin toss into the fountain, which, mythologically told through ancient stories and films, symbolizes one's return to Rome, finding love in Rome, and marrying the love you met in Rome. The Trevi Fountain is known for being overcrowded with tourists at all hours of the day and night. This art, however, makes the picture-perfect atmosphere just right, end quote. And it is a beautiful artwork that has the fountain and then a woman in what I would define more as like a Spanish style or a Spanish styled look with a low white top with the shoulders bare and a beautiful flowing dress that's red and white.
Yeah, I could see that. It does have a little bit of
Big
a
hoop
Spanish flair
earrings,
to it, but it does have the Italian like stripes, red and white stripes, and polka dot scarf, or like kind of. So yeah, it's kind of a combination there, but it is a beautiful piece of art there.
Yeah, absolutely.
To note about the fountain.
Yes.
Don't take coins out of fountains, guys. Just as a tip, generally.
I think you're supposed to in some fountains, and then people fall in love with you.
Make sure that that's not illegal at the fountain that you are visiting.
You did just steal money. I mean,
like there are.
It may only be a penny, but you did just steal money.
there are lots of fountains it's illegal to step into, or
it's actually a lot of them. It's illegal to put. You're not supposed to put coins in the first place.
But. Yeah, so just check that out before you go. Before you go throwing in or taking
when in Rome,
out.
that's fine. If that's what they do, then you can do that.
You do as they do. That's right.
When in Rome is a tour company that does guided tours of Rome, the Vatican, and Pompeii. Here is their snippet from the frequently asked questions portion of their website. Quote, Rome, it's a jungle out there, so here's your machete. Having lived and worked in this magnificent city for a great many years, we're well placed to advise you. It's important to know about public transport, Rome taxi drivers, where and where not to eat, how to manage your time in our city, and most importantly, how to get the best experience from your time here, end quote. I've been to Italy, but I've never been to Rome. It always looks crowded. So if I'm going to visit, I should probably figure out when the closest thing to an off season is and try to visit then.
Yeah, that's smart. Yeah, I haven't been to Rome either, and I don't know if I'll visit the Vatican. But Pompeii was cool.
I've been to Pompeii. Yeah, I don't know. I could go back to Pompeii in the right circumstances, but it is awful touristy these days. So
yeah, I think if I was already there, already in the area or something.
Right. Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. I could see if you were going as part of more of a research thing and not as a tourist. I think you would
absolutely do that.
You would definitely. That's a thing that's a realistic thing for you. That would never be realistic for me in my line of work. All right, well, one of my goals in life, something that I came to in my 40s, is my desire to spend a year as an expatriate, which means living in a different country than my own. And the phrase, when in Rome, seems to be a decent advice in that regard, but I do think it's missing something. On the one hand, I enjoy learning about other cultures and other ways of doing things, and the best way to do that is to embrace those cultures. But on the other hand, I also think it's important to keep the parts of you that make you who you are, and not let all of those things go. But I think a failure to embrace a culture would make the expat life hard. So I think as a general rule, when I'm in Rome or Panama or Spain or Chile, I'll do as they do and just try and hold up to the small parts of me that I don't want to give up on. And I'll try something else on, for the year that I'm there and experiencing that culture. Well, that's about all the time we have for today. If you have any thoughts on the show or pop culture references we should have included, reach out to us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod, or comment on our website, bunnytrailspod.com.
It is poll time. Recently, we asked our patrons if they fly a flag or banner, and if so, when. 60% of respondents say they fly some sort of flag or banner, with 20% of total respondents saying they fly something all the time, and 40% saying some of the time.
Jan said, quote, U.S. flag on Independence Day sometimes. When we have exchange students, they bring a small flag of their home country with them and will display them in the house, end quote.
Super cool.
Yeah, that is really neat. I have a Wichita flag from Pride Fest. That's also a Pride trans flag hanging up on the wall in the background of my podcast videos. It stays up all the time. I do occasionally have some other flag or banner up to honor or remember folks in their time of struggle or hard work. I have a Jamaican flag to remember their recovery work following Hurricane Beryl. And I also currently have a Wichita State University banner up to honor loved ones who are students there. When I worked as a paramedic, we used to go out and put up the American flag every day at the start of the shift and take it down in the evening in a small ceremony. Usually there were only 2 of us that did that, but sometimes it was a bit bigger deal, like on certain holidays or on the anniversaries of tragic events in U.S. history. So then we would, maybe have a bigger crowd as we did that.
Yeah, I think that some of the memorial flag ceremonies are really, really beautiful. There was one during COVID that was just an array of white flags done at the Capitol that represented the number of lives lost during the initial time frame of that spreading, and it was really impactful to see those images of how many flags were there. For me personally, I love flags, but I don't think I really fly any. I have a pennant behind me for WSU. That is the school that I go to. If that counts as a flag. Otherwise, that's it.
I think by definition it's a flag, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, is it a flag? I'm trying to, like, it's a shape of, okay, fine. I do have a flag. So Mary said, quote, "The only flags I displayed regularly were from around the world in my choir room. Last year, I finally met the man who goes quietly through my neighborhood and places American flags along the curb just before patriotic holidays, and then takes them away right after. Nice guy. Now, I rarely display flags on my own, but they still stir up strong emotions. I once saw an American soldier running on the bike path in full camouflage, wearing a rucksack and carrying a huge flag from a country that had recently been invaded. I felt compelled to stop and consider the power of that message. Whatever the reason we fly a flag, be it to support those we love, like Dan, or to show solidarity for the oppressed, like the soldier, I believe it should always be for the positive qualities that flag represents." End quote. Agreed with that last statement there. Well, as a reminder, our silly polls mean absolutely nothing and are not scientifically valid, and patrons of all levels, including our free tiers, can take part. Head over to patreon.com/bunnytrailspod to take this week's poll. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week. Until then, remember,
Words belong to their users.